Now, to introduce Emma. So we first met when Emma was shortlisted and then won the Wilbur Smith Adventure Writing Prize last year with her debut novel, No Country for Girls. And that novel has been up for many other awards too. And this is the novel that Pen to Print asked us to be part of their Women's Empowerment Month series with, because it has a great dose of female anarchy, and Emma herself is a real powerhouse. So Emma is a practicing vet and she loves a road trip. She is an adventurer, having grown up in Western Australia and moved to London after spending her teens and her 20s learning how to ski, to snowboard, to ride horses and motorbikes, and even fly small aeroplanes. Really, what can't she do? So Emma, I'm going to hand over to you and ask you to introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about No Country for Girls, which we'll be talking about in more detail tonight. And then I believe you have a reading ready for us too.
Sure. Thanks, Georgina. Yeah, and thank you to you and Pen to Print and for inviting me, and also thanks for coming, all of you. Yeah, so don't think I probably won't say very much more about myself. I think Georgina's given me a very nice intro. I'll say a little bit about the book, which, and we will talk more about it, which is, yeah, it's a Thelma and Louise style road trip about two teen girls, Nao and Charlie, who take off along 2,000 kilometres of remote highway in Western Australia. And they do that after an unfortunate incident at the end of chapter 1 that leaves a man dead on Charlie's kitchen floor. They take off in the dead man's Holden Rodeo twin cab ute. So I was born in the UK. I grew up in Western Australia, and so yeah, it was a big love letter to Western Australia for me, this book. So I'm going to give you yeah, a micro reading, which is not from the very beginning of the book. It's near the beginning. It's from Charlie's point of view. So that's the paperback cover. As I said to Georgina, I'm surrounded by props here at my kitchen table, but you can't actually see any of them. So yeah, this is from Charlie's point of view. The book is told from Charlie, Nao, and Charlie's sister Gina's point of view. So it has 3 female voices in it. And this is from just when they're just out on the road, and it's kind of the early morning after the night before. And this is Charlie talking. Nao looks in the rear view. It's not exactly how I imagined the week starting either. An accessory to murder on the run in the victim's vehicle. Hardly murder, accident, self-defense, manslaughter, tops. She huffs out of breath, and we're about to run out of petrol. Shit, are we? I clock the yellow dashboard light. There's a roadhouse in 40 kilometres. We'll make it. When can we go back? I thought you were worried about that man outside your house. She checks the rear view again. You should be. You recognise the ute. He was looking for your bloke, Daryl. Not my bloke. Whatever, but who was he? Is he going to report him missing? Will your sister? How should I know? That's why I need to call her. I pull my phone out my pocket and now near enough chucks a handbrake turn. You can't use that. Big blast of horn. She swerves us back into the left lane as a truck sucks past and overtakes. One of them big road trains with 2 trailers on the back of it rattles the teeth in my head. Fuck's sakes, I say, get your license out of weedy packet. Your phone, she says. It's trackable. You can't keep it. She keeps turning her head to look at me. Watch the road, all right? That's why I got rid of mine. Could have told me that was why. I am telling you. I'm telling you now. You said you didn't have one. So you were dumb enough to believe it. Well, you can't keep it. The police can track it. She slows the car. It's a precaution, that's all. In case they find him. Throw it, she says. Chuck it out the window. No way. I unlock the screen. How am I going to call Jean? Just do it. She reaches across. I slap her hand away. No, give us a second. Got all my music on it. It's better if you don't think about it, she says. Our eyes meet, a patch of cloud in hers that slides away. What's her story? She still hasn't told me it. Here. She digs a hand in her messenger bag between the seats, waves the pen at me. Write her number down. I borrow Jean's number onto the inside of my arm, pull the SIM out the phone and stare at it before I crunch it between my teeth. What's that for? Nao says. Watch the road. The SIM. You destroy it, yeah, like they do on TV. That what you did with yours? She doesn't answer, just shifts her eyes front while I let the SIM and the phone case go out the window. I watch them flip off the bitumen onto the dirt, the little puffs of dust, the flat country stretching out forever, and the sun and everything else making my eyes sting. The phone I slide into my pocket so she can't see. Got all my music on it, Mum's music. I can keep it turned off. Nao doesn't have to know. Feels like nothing's going to be the same ever again as it is.
What a great introduction to both of those characters. That's just a wonderful piece of dialogue that really allows you, I feel, to get to know a little bit about what they're both like. Fantastically read as well. Thank you, Emma. For those who've not read the book, I think this is a perfect place for us to start, especially considering it is Women's Empowerment Month. Can you tell us a little bit about each Charlie and Nao? What are they like?
Sure. Okay. So I noticed when I was just looking, I know we had chatted about these questions, Georgina, and then I was looking at them this afternoon, and I really noticed that I find I can do it, but I find pinning down my characters actually quite hard. I much prefer conjuring them and letting them show people who they are, I suppose. But yes, it's helpful to have some shorthand, a bit of an intro. So Charlie, so these are two young teenage women who are not powerful in their lives in ways that are some partly different and partly similar. So Charlie's 17, she's white, she's queer, she's just been expelled from school for fighting. She's been brought up in a household of relative struggle in various ways. And yeah, she's fairly alone in the world, apart from her older sister, Gina, and they have a complicated relationship. Nao is 18, she's Aboriginal, she's straight, she's just finished her first year of uni, she's studying law, and she has been brought up in relative privilege, but also not in a particularly happy way, with her white mum and her white stepfather. And yeah, these characters, I mean, those are some of their differences, but actually probably the biggest difference is in their personalities. I mean, Charlie is the one who's reacting. She's impulsive, she's quite hostile and somewhat aggressive. She's a fighter. Nao is much more considered. She's really the thinker, certainly at the beginning of the story, and she's really driving the plot at the beginning of the story, even though you don't realize that for some time, probably until about the middle of the book. So yeah, they're very different personalities and backgrounds, although as the story goes on, it starts to become clear that maybe they're not as different as they might have thought they are.
You mentioned that they are hard to talk about for you in some ways. I wonder, you've told me a story about how they came to life. Could you tell people now where they came from? I wonder if that's connected.
Yeah, sure. So they appeared as if by magic during a writing exercise that was in the second week of the course. I started the crime fiction course at the University of East Anglia. And I went on that course with a very clear idea of what I was going to write. And then we were asked to do this exercise where two characters meet for the first time in a public place. And yeah, it was like my brain was hijacked by Nao and Charlie, who appeared almost fully formed during this writing exercise. They started arguing in my head, and they didn't stop for about 18 months, which was really great because that was about the time it took me to write the first draft of the novel. Yeah, and I had never had such a vivid and immediate experience of character before. They were really in my face and in my head. So, yeah, you're probably right, Georgina. It does that. I felt like, I think I'm always a bit like this with my characters, but they were even more so than ever before. I felt like they came to me totally. I did not go out looking for them.
Who was easier for you to write? It sounds like you have quite an affinity with both of them, and they're polar opposites, really.
Yeah, well, I don't think either was easier. I would say that Charlie came quicker and she was louder. And, if people have read the book or do read the book, that will probably be quite clear. She makes her presence felt in any interaction. And she certainly did with me. You know, but Nao was holding her own against Charlie. But I think Nao just took longer to arrive, and I experimented a bit more with her voice. It took me a little more time to, yeah, I just felt it took more time for her to arrive, which was just kind of perfect for her personality, really. That's the kind of person she is. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, but the whole process, although I knew that I was setting out to write a whole novel on this course, the whole process was, I guess there was a spirit of experimentation, and it was quite organic, but I was really led by these two characters. Also, I felt like they represented different aspects of my relationship to Western Australia, which was kind of interesting as well. Yeah,
Do you
which
mind telling
bit
us?
more as we go. We can say a bit more about that as we go on.
Let's talk about that now. We'll skip about in our plan a little bit. What kind
Sure.
of aspects of your relationship with Western Australia?
I guess, and that again, this is a bit hard for me to articulate, but I feel it. I think so. So, like I said, I was 9 when we emigrated to Australia, and we started road tripping the following year. We started road tripping north as a family, and that was our way of getting to know the place. And those road trips were, and growing up in such a beautiful state, Western Australia, was really formative for me. I think that Charlie kind of has, I mean, they both do. They both embody these things, but I think maybe Charlie does a bit more strongly. Kind of Charlie, I think some Australian readers would say that she's a bit retro, I think, maybe in the way she expresses herself, because I think she kind of has aspects of people I knew when I was a West Australian teenager. I know that it's no good for the time difference, but I know that some of my Australian friends and family have signed up for this, and I know that's going to make them laugh. But anyway, because they probably know the people I'm talking about. But yeah, so she has aspects. She's kind of like the in-your-face aspect of me having grown up in Australia, and I think now is much more more embodies a kind of longing for me that I have to connect with the place in a particular way. And I think that's why she is a young First Nations woman. That wasn't a conscious decision, but she's kind of holding the significance of country and the significance of the connection of 60,000 years of culture, First Nations culture in Australia. So they both represent different aspects of how I feel about the place.
Is Nao being of First Nations descent? Has that kind of affected the book or any conversations or your feelings towards it in any way?
Yeah, I think it has hugely. And like I said, it wasn't conscious. But I knew that so it might not have been immediately when she appeared that I knew she was Aboriginal, but it was very fast. And I didn't really hesitate about that. I just knew that it was right for her and Charlie. And at this point, again, quite quickly, I had this idea for probably a few years of maybe writing a Thelma and Louise style road trip story. But I didn't know how I was going to do it, or it was just only a vague idea. But as soon as I met these two characters, I knew they were the characters for that story. So I think once I had so I knew that quite quickly, and then I knew that Nao was Aboriginal quite quickly. And I think that I know there are lots of conversations going on and have been for some time about writing characters, even fictional characters who are not the same background as you. I didn't really hesitate because I knew it was right for the story. And also, at that point, I didn't know my book would be published. I just thought I was writing this book for myself, and I was writing the book that I would most like to read. And it was only when after I had finished the first draft, that I realized that the thing that was driving me completely unconsciously that I wasn't aware of was my feeling, even though I don't currently live in Australia, but my feeling of discomfort about us living on stolen land in Australia. So that was driving me to write this book. And that from that point of view, I needed to have Nao. I needed to have her First Nations background, and I needed to write these two characters trying to connect across their difference. That was crucial for me, but I didn't know it was crucial, not when I started.
What have the responses been to the relationship between those characters?
Actually, all I have to go on really is what readers have said to me, or readers have written in reviews, or readers, and particularly Australian readers that I've met when I've been back there, because I've been back for twice for different trips since the book came out. And actually, people have really responded to that. I had a conversation, actually. I wrote this really quite embarrassing kind of fangirly email to Leah Purcell, which this was probably over a year ago. And it is embarrassing because it was kind of I am a massive fan and you have got to make the movie of my book, which at that point the book had been optioned by by a production company, and they were quite annoyed with me, which is totally understandable. Anyway, but what was lovely about that was I ended up having a chat on the phone with Leah's partner, because they have a production company together. And at the moment, no one is actually making the movie of this book, but you never know, it might still happen. But I had a lovely chat to him, Bain Stewart, and he hadn't read the book, but I had told him a bit about the story, and he was just this is a universal story. People love this kind of story about people from two different backgrounds trying to connect. And he was particularly talking about movies because he makes movies. But yeah, my sense from talking to people and hearing from people is that they have really appreciated the difference between the two characters. They've really appreciated, certainly some readers can see how much effort I made, or perhaps they don't see the effort, but not to stereotype my two characters, which was it was somewhat intentional, but it was also like I said, they kind of were almost fully formed when I met them. So I didn't have to do that much. I didn't have to do that much work on the characters. I just had to kind of wait for them to arrive.
One of the things that they do have in common is that they're both teenagers. Do you think it's quite common or not to have teenagers as your central characters in an adult novel?
I think it's certainly in the adult. I mean, this is an adult crime thriller. It's certainly not common, but it's actually, yeah. I mean, it's not uncommon. I mean, people are adult stories are sometimes written from the point of view of children or young adults. Actually, I had a really interesting experience with that because I was maybe halfway through the first draft, and I had a one-to-one meeting with a literary agent, which is a thing that sometimes you do when you're an unpublished author. You can kind of sign up to have a little one-to-one meeting with an agent, which is an opportunity. You send them like the opening chapter of your book or the opening few pages, and then you get it's kind of a bit like speed dating almost for authors and literary agents. So you get like a 15-minute chat with them about what they have read. So I met this agent and she said to me, she really liked the voice. This was Charlie opening the book. She really liked the voice. I think I'd probably sent her a short synopsis. She liked the story. She thought it was all great, but she said, you will never be able to sell this book because there's a mismatch between the young, immature teen voice and the adult storyline. And that was really interesting because I did freak out a bit. I mean, at that time, still, it wasn't like I was really aiming for publication, but when someone says you'll never be able to sell your book, it was a slight bummer. So I did think initially, I did think she was right. She said to me, can you make the character more mature? And I knew I couldn't change Charlie, that she is her own being. There was no way I could make her more mature. It wasn't going to happen. So what it did cause me to do was bring Gina more strongly into the story, even though she's not one of the protagonists, because she is a few years older, quite a few years older. But it also, that was the point at which I read Chris Whitaker's book, We Begin at the End, and I was so kind of won over by Duchess Day Bradley, who now I'm thinking, is she 15 or is she 13? Anyway, it doesn't matter. This is a young teen voice that carries a whole beautiful epic crime novel. So at that point, I felt really reassured and I didn't worry about it anymore. And actually, when I did meet my agent and editor for the first time, when I asked them, it hadn't even been an issue for either of them. So yeah, I'd say it's probably not common, but I think the teenage experience is, certainly for me, it's a fascinating one. And my two protagonists in the book that I've just finished a draft of are also slightly older teenagers.
Do you think it offers something different? Is there a power within kind of a teenage voice?
I think it does, but I think it depends. I think it depends on the author. I think that you probably are drawn to writing particular characters probably for quite mysterious, unconscious reasons. but it does give you particular opportunities. I mean, I can remember, I remember certainly my later teen years quite vividly. And I remember, there's a sense that you are kind of invincible in a way. At the same, or certainly you don't have a sense of, certainly I did not have a sense of my own mortality. I felt like I was going to live forever. At the same time, I was pretty anxious and I wasn't the happiest young person. So there was a lot of angst going on. And, your brain is moving really fast. Your body is changing, the world is changing. It's kind of as well. So I think there's just so much for me, it's pretty endlessly fascinating, actually.
Would you ever write for young people?
Sorry?
Would you ever write for young people?
Yes, I totally would. I think I mean, that's what I started doing. So that's, I think, what probably got me started writing teen characters was I thought I was going to write for children. And I remember having this light bulb moment. I was at the Perth Writers' Weekend. I was standing in line for Sean Tan to sign a book, and I just had this light bulb moment, which was, I need to write a novel. I mean, it's not like I hadn't written stuff before then, but I'd certainly never even considered writing a novel. And I remember that so vividly, standing this line, feeling so happy and just kind of chatting to people in this line, feeling so happy because that was the thing I was going to do. And then I came back to the UK and I did heaps of study about writing for children. And it was through that experimenting that I realized that it was writing it was the teen voice that I liked writing. And so I wrote a few books that never got published. And it's, there's quite possible that I would go back to that at some point.
Some of the things that are kind of used as marketing material around No Country for Girls. One of them is, whether this is you or whether this is your publisher saying it, but one of them is saying that this is a novel about young women who find their power. What do you mean by power?
So that's something that I have said about myself as something that it is an enduring theme for me. So when I say that, what comes to mind are both agency and freedom, which I suppose might not necessarily seem to equate with power, but certainly in sense of empowerment, or feeling a sense that you can be and do whatever you set out to do in your life. So I always tend to write so far I have often written young women who, for whatever reason, are not powerful in their lives, and how they find a way through that, and through whatever obstacles they might put in their own way, or other people or institutions or society might put in their way. And again, I think that's just an unconscious drive in me to keep doing that, I suppose, in ways that not as extreme as in this story, but in ways that I did as a girl and young woman. How did I find my way in the world? And you know what, actually, watching Thelma and Louise when it came out in 1991, so I was in my early 20s, and watching that movie was just a total game changer. I remember what it felt like coming out of that movie. It was just like the sense that the sense that I could, I mean, yeah, that I could be, the world felt different when I came out of that movie in terms of possibilities. So, and it's not like it wasn't like I was a child that was being told I couldn't do things. I honestly grew up thinking I could do the things, I could do anything I turned my mind to. So I was very fortunate that that was what was reflected back to me as a child. But that movie was still a total game changer.
You just said that sometimes it's, maybe the power is, the imbalance could be against the system. But also you talk about this book in the sense that it is women taking on the patriarchy. And in No Country for Girls, your antagonist is male. Do you think you'd ever write about women taking on other women? Or is it just all about like this? It's all about their solidarity.
No, I would totally write about women taking on other women. I think that women fighting back against men, misogyny, or even what my editor called institutional misogyny. He was kind of talking about he was particularly talking about the police in that way, because there is some police corruption in this story. So yeah, I think those are themes that I will definitely revisit. But in the book I've just written, although those themes are very strongly there, once again I have two young women taking on a male antagonist. But there is also a young woman who, yeah, she's kind of an antagonist in her own right. And actually writing her was just so much fun. I really enjoyed that. That kind of surprised me. So, and I certainly have other ideas for stories where I think there's a lot of female solidarity going to come through in future books, but still, yes, that I like the challenge of writing nuanced characters, I guess. And like I said, look, quite often it's pretty, the process is pretty intuitive. So it really depends what emerges.
I'm just going to hop over to the chat because we've got a couple of questions, and
Yeah.
I have to ask one about adventure, of course. Which, when people think of adventure fiction, this is from Charlotte. They often think of swashbuckling, gun-wielding, burly men. When you wrote No Country for Girls, did you have that in mind? Was it daunting or liberating to write something like you have?
It was totally liberating, the whole experience. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did have, as any writer would say, I did have some really difficult patches writing the first draft and subsequent drafts of this story. But for the most part, it was utterly liberating writing this, because the characters and their voices were so strong. Honestly, it felt like I was just, once I had a rough idea of the plot, because I do plan, so I had a plan. Once I had that, honestly, it felt like I just had to point them where they were going, which was quite easy because they were just heading north on Great Northern Highway. And then I just had to hang on for the ride. And certainly for quite a lot of the writing, that's what it felt like. So it wasn't at all daunting. But I didn't realize I was writing an adventure story. And I did know that I was writing a crime novel, because I knew I had to write a crime novel and hand it in at the end of my course. So I knew I was doing that. And I had the Thelma and Louise kind of template in my mind, but the story that was coming out was really different. And it was only really when the book had, in the run up to publication, that when my friend Lizzie Poot got shortlisted for the Adventure Writing Prize, that I thought, oh, maybe that would be a good fit for my book. And but even right up to having been shortlisted, I still felt, is it enough of an adventure? Is it enough of an adventure? Because a lot of the adventure, or certainly a significant part, was what was happening between the two characters. And that was what drove me to write the book. But I didn't know I certainly didn't know how, say, the judges would respond to that. But they really did respond to that, which was so amazing.
I think the best adventure stories, but also really probably the best stories overall, will have all of those elements.
Yeah.
You know, there will be that journey, but also that relationship between the characters. People want to read about real people a lot of the time.
Of course, you know, and that was part of, I mean, that was definitely the initial spark of writing the story for me. Was I could see, oh, there's a lot going on between these two characters, like they have a lot of stuff to work out. So yeah, I think that comes across for readers.
I'm going to skip now to the other genre, so let's talk a little bit about crime.
Yes.
Which of course No Country for Girls is. And I know we've talked before, Emma, about the term Australian noir.
Yes.
You are a crime writer. Can you tell us a little bit about what Australian noir means?
So I think these days when people talk about Australian noir, which has become a kind of marketing term, I just think they're talking about crime fiction set in Australia in a particular, very easily identifiable landscape, a kind of outback landscape with a mystery and usually a few murders. And, you know, people absolutely, the people who blazed a trail in that are Chris Hammer, Jane Harper, Gary Disher. Not that there haven't been many before and since, but the actual definition of noir, because my understanding was that true noir fiction was very dark and quite a kind of quite just very dark. And I actually looked it up today, and now I can't remember what the definition was, but it really, really made me laugh, because it was something like, it just sounded like, it said something like it had a really kind of it just sort of embodied a really kind of grim view of humanity or something. And I thought, okay, I'm definitely not writing that. But Australian noir, yeah, it's a term for Australian crime fiction. And I do see myself for now as a crime writer, not that I might not write in other genres, but I'm definitely not writing about the crimes, which I think is true for most crime writers. We write crime fiction for all sorts of reasons, but I'm really writing about other things. It's just that crime fiction, for me, is a great vehicle for putting, not that you can't do it in other ways, I know you totally can, but it's a great vehicle for putting people into really crucial situations and seeing how they respond. And that's a thing that I love, and I would say most authors love to do to our characters. Put them in crucial situations and keep cranking up the stakes and see what happens.
Do you think being a crime writer brings you into a community?
It totally and absolutely has brought me into a community. And I kind of, I have found, I mean, for now at least, I'm living in the UK. I visit Australia, and I visit Australia fairly frequently for longish periods of time when I can. but I have met Australian crime writers online and in person, but I've had a hugely and look, they've been lovely, but the big welcome I've had has been from the crime writing community in the UK. And I think that I was really, really so fortunate that Val McDermid picked me in the book for her New Blood panel, which she did do until last year. She stopped doing it now. That she was doing every year at the Theakston Old Peculiar Crime Writing Festival in Harrogate. So she picks usually 4 new crime authors, and she does a panel with you, which is kind of like introducing you to this community of readers and writers. And so I was so fortunate that that happened, because I said this to her because I saw her again last year at Harrogate, and I just said, Val, thank you so much for putting me on the map. Because that's what it felt like. I would then introduce myself to other authors, and not always, but quite often they would have heard of me in the book, and that was really all down to that. And yeah, it has been and is just a very warm and supportive community, and I know, and it certainly is in Australia too. But my connections in Australia have more been online than in person. And as one more thing I will say, that for writers, for anybody actually, but I think particularly for writers, because what we do most of the time, day to day, is completely solitary. We are beavering away at our with our notebooks or laptops or whatever. That community is kind of crucial for almost every author I know, and without it, it is what makes it worthwhile meeting other authors and readers. So, and that's what I love about these the many and varied crime writing festivals we have in the UK, is that you meet all those people, as well as booksellers and bloggers, people getting together to talk about the books that they love, is really, kind of makes it.
It's so important. It's such a solitary job, to have people that are out there responding to your work. Absolutely vital. I'm going to switch to the chat again because we've had some great questions in. We will get on to talking a bit more about your writing, but there's a fantastic question from Julie regarding process, and your writing process, which I'd like to make sure we ask you to answer. So do you find you have to write many drafts? For example, how much cutting do you have to do and shifting text about? Maybe you could answer that specifically and just tell us a bit more about your process.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start with the question. So yes, I can't really compare myself to other writers in terms of how many is a lot in terms of drafts. I don't know, but for No Country for Girls, I think when I handed it into the course, I handed in the 3rd draft, which isn't that many really. In many ways it did feel still quite raw, not unpolished, but still there were things that I hadn't figured out. Then once we had I got this very unexpected book deal, and Little Brown took the book on to publish it. We probably did maybe 4 more drafts, sort of kind of like 3 or 4 rounds of edits. So so for this book, less than 10 drafts. For the book I have just finished a draft of, which has been much, much harder to write and took me much, much longer to write the first draft, because initially I couldn't get past the first 15,000 words and I kept starting at the beginning again because I knew it wasn't right. So I probably started it from scratch 5 times before I finally got to the end, the first draft, which was an absolute total mess. And then I went back and rewrote it. And that book, I think, will need quite a number of drafts. And interestingly, that you talk about, I haven't read in the chat, Georgina, but you talked about moving blocks of text around. So at the weekend, I was at this lovely, lovely little festival called Bay Tales up in Whitley Bay, which I can highly, highly recommend for anyone who is a fan of crime fiction. Tickets are already on sale for next year. And they had some brilliant authors all day on the Saturday. And one of them was Gillian McAllister, who apparently, I did not know this, had just become had just been outed on social media in terms of her process, was that she writes her process is she gets to the end of the first draft, and once she gets to the end of the first draft and she knows what the story is and what's going to happen, she deletes it and then she starts again. So I don't have anything nearly as impressive to share. But that was so interesting because it really got me thinking, because in my struggles with this second book, I have pulled a lot of, because it took me so long to get to the point of getting to the end of the first draft, I pulled a lot of bits, cut and pasted a lot of bits from early form, early kind of variations of the book. And so it doesn't feel, I mean, it will get the work that it needs to get, but it doesn't feel quite, in terms of voice and tone, I think it probably doesn't feel quite as cohesive as it could. And I was thinking, this was after I'd emailed it to my agent, I was thinking, I really need to do like a Gillian McAllister and like delete it and start from the beginning, but I don't think I have the heart to do that to myself. But it would probably be, it might be a better book if I were to do that, but it might not, because everyone's different. So with each book I'm getting a handle on how I do it. And although every book is really different, there are certain things that I can see that I do the same. So just to say a little bit more about my process, how I start, I will have an idea kicking around, and it might be kicking around for it certainly will usually be kicking around for months, and maybe even years. And I won't really write anything down until I have a sense of the main characters. And then once I've got a sense of the main characters and a vague sense of the plot, I don't really start writing anything down until it becomes quite insistent, like I've got to write something down. And
absolutely nothing, no notes. It's just all in your head.
I will write notes, but not straight away. So like the whole the kind of incubating stage goes on for some time before I will write anything down at all. Then I'll write a lot of stuff down. But and probably the first thing I will write down pretty well is a blurb. So I'll write what I would write for the blurb, and that's almost the most exciting part of the whole writing process for me, is like coming up with a blurb that makes me feel excited and that I think would make readers feel excited about the book. And then I might write the first few scenes at that point. So I'm just getting a flavour of it, kind of thing. And once I've kind of got the main characters, I've got this blurb, then I will do like a plot outline, which might be like a page or a couple of pages of bullet points of things that I would like to happen. And only then, And then I will probably go through, and then often, yeah, I'll write loads of notes on the characters. Then I'll start to write all sorts of notes about what they like and what they're like doing and what their background is and why and what, what do they want in this book? What are they actually, what's their aim, what's their goal at the beginning of the book? And once I've done a whole of that, then I will start writing. But the plan usually will constantly change. So I have a plan, and as that gets more detailed, so I'll start to flesh out that plan until it's all, like every scene has a description, and it's pretty well always open on my laptop. So I'll be writing and the plan is always open because I'm often going and changing it depending on what happens on the page.
If you have to give an exact time frame, ballpark time frame, let's say for the novel that you've just finished the draft of, how much do you think of your time is planning versus writing a draft?
I don't know, but I would say, because it's a bit, the two things are kind of happening a little bit hand in hand, but I would say planning time is much less than actual writing time. Like it's probably maybe only 10%, but then the writing is always feeding back into the plan. So in a sense, I guess maybe overall there's more time goes into that. And I don't often write synopses. I hate writing them. But if I have to write one for somebody, like I might have to write one. I have kind of written one for this current book, but it's writing a synopsis of the plot is not one of my strong points.
That's an art in itself.
Oh, yes.
A dark art. I've got another question in the chat. You talked a little bit about the voice, and this is from Lisa, who's asking, how important is it to stay true to vernacular and the authentic voice when characters have different backgrounds or accents?
I think, well, for me, I don't think I would necessarily do it the same in every, I wouldn't necessarily do it the same in every book, but I need to get, there are certain things about voice that I would want to try and communicate right out on the page, which I've definitely done in No Country for Girls, especially in Charlie's chapters. But that was, again, it wasn't really conscious. It was just how she was coming out on the page. And I think because I had written when I went on the crime fiction course, I had written 3.5 young adult novels, none of which had been published. Each time I wrote one, they got a bit darker and crimey things started happening. So it was really natural for me to go and do that course. But it was very freeing knowing that I was writing for adults and I didn't have to worry about the swearing in the book, or I could just tell the story. I really let rip, and I let those characters just splurge themselves onto the page. So I think that's why Charlie came out on the page in the way that she did. And a lot of readers have absolutely loved that and really responded to it, and some have like really hated it. So like a few, not that many actually, but a few Australian readers have really hated it, and I don't quite know why that is, but I guess if you're an Australian reader, you're kind of like, well, that's how you would read that character anyway. You don't need it spelled out on the page. But if you're reading in a different place, a lot of people in outside Australia have really, really responded. I'm not saying Australian readers haven't responded to Charlie, because a lot of people have absolutely loved her as well. But she is, as we would say in the UK, she is a bit of a Marmite character. So I knew that people would either really love her or just be like, oh my God. So yes, she has been a little bit like that. But but yeah, so I think it's important for me to somehow manage to communicate voice. But I think I feel I could, yeah, I mean, we're learning all the time. I feel like I could become, I always feel I can do better in that
What
way.
was the response to Charlie's cursing? I mean, just even from the reading that you gave us at the beginning of, we know that she loves the swear word.
I can't really find a section. It's hard for me to find a good reading without her swearing in it. I tell you what, I honestly expected to get 1-star reviews because of the swearing, and I don't get me wrong, I have had 1-star reviews, but not because of the swearing. And that really surprised me. But actually, that's been lovely, because a few reader reviews have mentioned the swearing, Charlie swearing, but they've said things like, yeah, she swears a lot, but it's really in her character. And yeah, so people have commented on it, but it hasn't, not as far as I could, not as far as I'm aware, it hasn't actually, it hasn't put readers off, which, because I knew I didn't want to censor this young woman. It was kind of like, I had a little interesting sort of conversation with my editor. We'd done one round of edits, and then we were doing the line edit, and he sent me this email, and it was like, Emma, I think he said something like, Emma, I personally love the fact that Charlie swears like a builder, but I think maybe we need to look at this. And I was like, so furious. Like, you are not censoring my young woman. It's just not going to happen. I didn't actually say that to him, but I just was so furious. And I talked to a few friends about it, and this is not happening. But it was interesting, because then I went away and I did a little bit of research, and I found this thing online, which for authors writing crime novels, or any kind of novel, I guess, if you've got sweary characters, it's very useful. I found this thing online called the Fuckety Score with Jericho Writers. You can just Google it. And basically you put in your word count and you put in the number of swear words, and it gives you a score, and then you can measure yourself. And so I realised that we were way off the scale. I mean, we were like way off the scale.
So this is it comparative to other novels.
Yes, but I was way off the scale compared to the grittiest of gritty crime novels. So I thought, okay, I need to do something about this. So I did go through and I did take out quite a lot of her swearing. And then, but my editor didn't know this, right? And then when he sent me the notes, but he sent me the notes on the draft that I hadn't removed the swearing, and he didn't mention it. So then I said to him, Cal, what about the swearing? You said you were going to say something about the swearing. He said it'll be clear in my notes. I'll just put something in my notes. And then his response was something like, yeah, well, I read it again and it really didn't seem so bad. But I was actually really glad that I did take out the amount that I did, because I took out quite a lot. So people who have read it will realise that it was definitely off the scale.
I love that exists, that you can check.
Yeah, it was very helpful.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about your experience being a debut author. And No Country for Girls has been shortlisted. It has won numerous different awards. And I think it's easy for readers or aspiring writers to make assumptions about what that means for your journey as a writer. Could you just tell us a little bit about your experience bringing a debut into the world?
I'm sure I'm not unusual. I know that I'm not unusual in this way. When you're a debut, and it doesn't matter how long you've been trying to get published, and I had, between getting the idea to write a novel for the very first time and getting this book published, was 14 years of me trying, getting rejected, writing another book. Just to give people an idea. But despite that, when you then get the book deal and you kind of enter into this editing process and then the pre-publication and publication, you have no clue. And I had the most unrealistic expectations. And you just don't understand about the industry. And there's still a lot I don't understand about the industry. So for me, the debut experience was just the most incredible roller coaster of, kind of these incredible highs and these kind of crushing lows at the same time, and everything in between. And it's really because we just don't know what to expect, and we're not, mostly, I'm sure this is the case for everybody, mostly we just don't get told what to expect. So yeah, I feel like I haven't really answered your question. I think I feel most debuts, if you're paid a kind of reasonably modest advance for your book, you're not going to get a lot of marketing for your book, maybe not really any marketing for your book, but you will have a publicist who will get your book out for reviews, pitch you to festival organizers, maybe get you to write an article, in the press associated with your book, all sorts of things. So I had a great publicist who did all those things for me. And yeah, I was very lucky to get on Val McDermott's New Blood panel. And then the following year, yes, we had a whole load of different long listings and short listings for awards, which was completely took me by surprise, totally. And that was both in Australia and the UK. So that was really lovely. And yeah, I had some, just to tell you one little thing that happened. So because I knew I was going to be on this panel at Harrogate, and the timing for that was so amazing, because the No Country for Girls in hardback was published the first Thursday of that Harrogate festival. So I travelled up on the train on publication day. I got to Harrogate. I had a message from a friend who had said something like, "Emma, your book is everywhere here." So she was already at the festival site. I hadn't seen my book in a shop. I didn't even know if it would get into, you don't even know if you're going to see your book in a shop, really. And so when I went past Imagined Things bookshop in Harrogate, which is the independent shop there, and they had my book in the window, and that was just the most amazing thing to happen on my publication day. So I went into the shop and cried, and then told them that I was happy to sign any copies of the book, and they were thrilled to see me. So, those little things just kind of make the experience. And also I had a lot of, in Australia, although I was here, I had a lot of shops hugely support the book when it came out in Australia, which was just amazing. So I was getting sent lots of little pictures and seeing pictures online of my book in shops, which was amazing. I don't really know if I've answered your question, but the whole thing has been, like I said, just very it's in many ways completely exceeded all of my expectations, and in other ways, in other ways I had ridiculous expectations. So that gives you a bit of an idea.
I think saying that it is a roller coaster, and you don't have a benchmark as a debut author to know what your expectations should be.
Oh, you have absolutely no clue, unless you have. I mean, I've learned a lot from author friends, but even then, even people telling me things about their experience, people who had gone before me, you don't really get it until you're having your own experience of it.
We are coming towards the end of the event, but we have a reading list, Emma, that you've very kindly put together for people who've joined us tonight. Could you just tell us a little bit about why you've chosen the titles that are on your list?
Sure. So it was really, really hard to get that. I started with about 25 books and a few movie books and movies and TV shows, and I had to whittle it down to, I can't remember how many I whittled it down to in the end. But
there's 12 on the list. I don't know how many you started with.
So yeah, I started with about 25. I'm just going to open it now so I can remember what
I have just popped it in the chat so people can download it from there, or Enterprint can send it out to everyone who's joined us tomorrow. Yes,
cool. Thanks for doing that. So most of these are in here because they have really great female characters in them. Not all, but most. Or because they helped me when I was writing. Or they had, like Kim Scott's book Taboo is an incredible and beautiful reconciliation story. So that's why that book is in there. The Animals in That Country is a road trip, an Australian road trip, and it's like no other road trip you will have read in a million years. But yeah, pretty well all of them have these incredible women characters, all, you know, of all different ages, backgrounds, sexualities, and you know that. Also, I did take some care not to. I could have completely given you a list of crime novels, which I did make some effort not to do. I could have easily done that. There's quite a few crime novels in there here, but again, they're all books. If they're about a crime, they're really about the characters. And the movie, because in the end I only put one movie in there, I could have put quite a few. Hunt for the Wilder People, which is just such a total delight from beginning to end. And although the main character actually isn't a woman, the woman in it does play a crucial role, and it has quite a nod. It's not a road trip, but it has quite a nod to Thelma and Louise at the end. And it's also very funny. So that's why that is in there. Woman on the Edge of Time was like this kind of, is this like feminist classic that totally blew me away when I was in my 20s and sort of changed my whole mind about things in the way that Thelma and Louise did. Yeah, so there's much to enjoy. I really encourage people to check these books out, have a look at them online and see what
appeals,
see what captures your attention. I mean, also I really encourage people to read outside of their normal preferences, because that's one of the things that I benefited from doing the course I did, was kind of like, and in fact lots of other, because I had done a lot of writing courses before I went on that one, mostly writing for children, and we would always read books. There would always be a reading list. We'd read books, and I would read books that I wouldn't normally read, and that's now probably the way I learn most, is just by reading how other people do things.
Are there any books that you've read that you've found particularly useful in terms of learning about the craft of writing?
Do you mean writing craft books, or yes,
or a novel that you think has been done especially well? Let's start with the craft.
Well, the book, because actually I have in my little props here, I've got 3 books that I have really benefited from. Stephen King's On Writing, which I just find so encouraging. Actually, I need to read. I have read that a couple of times, but I know people who read this book every year, and I feel like maybe I need to definitely read it. And John Yorke's Into the Woods, which I'm kind of obsessed by. And I've done some workshops with him, which is really about story and why we tell stories, but also structure. And I mean, there's so many ways to write, but I'm kind of obsessed with his what he says about the midpoint of the story and what happens at the midpoint of the story, and how satisfying it is when things really shift in a particular way at the midpoint of the story. And I'm kind of obsessed with that. So I always try to do something along those lines. But it's a learning.
One final question just before we round off for the evening. Is there a novel that you feel has particularly taught you something about writing? A realization, maybe?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I actually wrote this when in the Q&A we did for the shortlist, when I did the Q&A with Charlotte, that Anna Burns's book Milkman, which totally blew me away when I bought it. I remember I didn't know anything about it. I think at the time it hadn't won the Booker, but it was on the shortlist or something. I picked it up in a shop and I looked at and I read the first line and I just went to the till straight away. Like, I just didn't need to know anything about it. I was completely gripped by the first line. And there was something about that. It's just such a skilled book. It's a bit hard to say why, but I think she really writes about momentous trauma in that book in such an understated way. And I really did learn something, I hope, from doing that. I'm not saying that I am able to write about such things in an understated way, but the tone of that book was just perfect somehow. And it's hard to write about momentous trauma in ways that your reader, it's a challenging thing to write about, but it is something that I'm interested in. So yeah, that book really stayed with me.
It's not one I've read, but it's one that I will be reading.
Also, another amazing young woman character. So yes, I would.
Highly recommended. Emma, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Emma very kindly offered to do a giveaway of a copy of No Country for Girls and a much sought after Cherry Ripe.
And a Cherry Ripe, which is my last Cherry Ripe that I actually have got of the current batch. So yes, we will, I think, be picking one person from everyone who signed up.
Absolutely. It's a good job you're going back to Australia soon so you can get some more supplies. So one of you will put your names into a lottery and one of you will be selected at random and we'll be in touch about how to reach you. Emma, is there anything you'd like to add before we sign off for the evening?
I'd just like to say thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Georgina. Your questions were so great and I love talking about these characters. So it has been a joy. Thank you to everyone for coming along and to everyone who signed up, because I know there are some Australians who will watch this back, who it's like about 3 a.m. there, certainly in Western Australia. And thanks to Pen to Print for having me. So that's it really. I've really loved it. I love talking, like I said, I love talking about this book. So thanks.
Well, we love talking about it too. And for anyone who's not read the book yet, we highly recommend that you go out and get yourself a copy of No Country for Girls. Do also check out Pen to Print on Eventbrite for more of their fantastic programme of events. And all that leaves me to say is have a lovely evening, everyone. And thank you once again so much for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.